Hello and welcome to Mel Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is the third video in my little colorwork series that I've been doing. So the first two videos in the series will be linked below. If you have not seen them yet, please do check them out. If you've been with me for the whole series, thank you so much for continuing to watch. I'm glad that you're here. So for this video, I'm going to be talking you through my experience of doing some just exceptionally unsuccessful swatching and the journey that happened after that, where I sort of realized that I actually maybe needed to learn more about color before I could do what it was that I wanted to do in my mind. So let me get the swatches out. So about a year ago, I had found this really cool Rowan vest pattern that had very traditional looking colorwork on the front and then plaid on the back. So you were meant to knit the colorwork flat, which I didn't mind. And I was so excited about the plaid back that I couldn't wait to get started, right? So I made a special trip out to Webb's. I live within an hour and a half of Webb's, and so I wanted to see the colors in person. So I drove out there, I bought all of the yarn for this, and I did everything that I had previously done in the past. You know, I looked at the colors in the original pattern, I sort of chose lights and darks to slot in the way that I had done previously. But when I had chosen my colors, I really liked how they looked together. And then when I went to swatch them, it did not turn out well. So here are the colors, and I realize that this, now that I know what the swatch looks like, this looks like I can tell that this maybe wasn't the right choice, but I liked how these colors work together. But here's the swatch. And it just looks like Halloween. I mean, there is not much about this swatch that is working, right? I'm always trying to learn from, you know, whatever it is that I do. So let's talk about the things that are somewhat successful. The definition in this motif here, you can easily see this color against the background color. You can easily see that we have a flower and an X, you know, essentially an X and O pattern, which is probably the most traditional colorwork pattern that you will see. You can easily see that pattern, but the colors just don't work, you know. There's not much about these colors that is working for me. And the front of the vest was going to continue to have this motif repeated again and again. So it would be like black, gray. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm going to look like I'm in, you know, a prison jumpsuit. So normally I can find something in a swatch that I might want to keep, but, you know, some color combo or something like that. But for this one, I just decided to completely go back to the drawing board, which was painful because I had purchased the yarn for this, and it's like, okay. But I pulled some stuff out of my stash that I thought would work and just went with a completely different color palette. And now here is how that swatch turned out. Also not particularly successful, right? Again, this motif down here is fine. You know, I can see what's going on here. So in this motif, we have both the main color and the contrast color changing at the same time, which is a very common thing in Fair Isle knitting. So this background naturally colored yarn is just too bright. It's too stark. There's not enough contrast between the natural and this sort of lighter green in the middle there. Now we have sort of a Christmas effect going on, which is also not what I was going for. And so doing both of these swatches made me think like, ooh, I actually need to learn more. Like there's something that's not translating between when I look at the colors as a group and being able to see how they're going to work in colorwork. And so I decided to really have like a come to Jesus moment with myself and go to what I consider to be the source, which is Alice Starmore. If you are into colorwork knitting at all, this book is where it's at. There's a lot of discussion of color, shading in Fair Isle designs, pages of charts, and also some patterns. All of this is great, but the shining star for me goes to the pages of photos that have swatches with them. Alice Starmore, in addition to being a knitting icon, is also a photographer, and so she has pages in this book that are photos that she has taken, and then she has done a swatch to show how, with both using the structure of the motif and color, you can really translate a scene or a group of colors or your original inspiration into knitting, and I just got so excited over this when I saw it. After those 2 unsuccessful swatches in a row, I decided to take a few weeks away from knitting colorwork and just study this book. I looked at each one of these swatches, and for the ones that really appealed to me, I tried to identify why. What was it that I liked about them? Were there any trends that I could see across swatches that made them successful or not? One thing this process solidified for me is the way color is typically arranged in a Fair Isle motif. Background colors in a slow gradation toward the middle and then back out. Oftentimes there will be a pop of super vibrant or even weird color just in the very center, just one row of the whole motif, and that can really perk up the entire design. Another thing that I noticed is that the contrast colors will tend to shade in harmony with the background color. So if the background is going from dark to light, the contrast color will also go from dark to light. The other thing that this book made me realize, which might seem obvious to some of you, but it just didn't occur to me really, is that I don't have to follow the designer's recommendations of when to change color, like at all, if I don't want to. Whereas previously my process had been to sort of slot in colors according to the designer's suggestion. You know, I could add in my own colors, but, you know, if I was subbing in, say, a dark blue for a dark green, wherever that dark green originally appeared in the motif, I was using that dark blue, whether it was gonna work well or not. And so most of the time that worked out. Like for years, I've been knitting colorwork for years, and most of the time that works, honestly. So if that's your process, keep doing it if you're totally satisfied with how things are coming out, because it often does work. But with this experience I had had with these swatches, I was like, I need to try this out. And that brings me to my current project, which I am very excited about. And it is sort of a play on the chestnut pattern from this book, Wildwood by Marie Wallin. So here's the original pattern in the book. And I really liked these motifs, but I wanted to put them on a pullover and also change up the color palette entirely, because this color palette is quite similar to the color palette of the sweater I'm wearing, which is the oak pattern. It's in this book as well. And so I didn't want to have 2 sweaters that looked basically the same, very same color palette, so I really wanted to switch up the colors on this. As written, this pattern only calls for 8 colors, but I am actually using 16. I wanted to work entirely from stash if I could, so I started out by selecting colors in the same way we discussed this sweater in the last video in this series, where I identified the main colors that were standing out in each motif and chose those first and then filled in contrast colors. The other thing that I did was to take the chart that is in the Marie Wallin book and break it down into just background color and contrast color for each motif. And so what that ended up looking like is this. I just charted it in Excel and sort of colored in, you know, the boxes. And that way I was not held to where she chose to switch the background and the foreground colors. I could then go through and say, okay, based on my 2 color chart here, where do I want the background and the foreground to change? So I ended up doing more gradual gradations of color and also just more frequent color changes in my finished swatch. So let's look at the process, because I didn't get it right the first time or the second time. So let's look at those swatches. So here is my first swatch that I did for this. I really like some aspects of this and not others. So I'm very glad I swatched and didn't just barge ahead. The things that I liked are, I like these 2 motifs up here. I like the sort of color combination, but I wasn't sure I wanted to keep it within these motifs. So, you know, these are both sort of dark and also next to each other. So I maybe wanted to switch that up a little bit, but I liked the overall combination there. The things that are not working out so well for me are these 2 bottom motifs. This one, this orangey coral red, is popping too much. It's sort of the same effect as what happened with my Yell vest, which we discussed in the last video in this series. And then in this motif, you can tell that it's, again, a traditional X and O motif, but this stripe here where I changed the background color is a little bit too abrupt and harsh, and there's, you know, it's standing out like it's a stripe, and so I didn't want that. So I knew I wanted to change out both of these. The other thing I was glad I tried here is this corrugated 2x2 rib. I think that that's a very interesting effect. I like how graphic it is, but it's also just a lot of look. Like, I think it sort of competes a little bit too much with the pattern in the garment, and so I wanted to switch that out and see if a 1x1 might be a little bit better. So here is the second version of my swatch. You can see a lot has changed, but there's some sections that are sort of reminiscent of the first swatch, right? This motif here, which I now really like, has the same colors that I used in this motif over here. So I liked what had happened here. I just wanted them to sort of appear in a little bit different order. I flipped the background and the contrast color here, so now we have this oyster pink as the background and this purplish navy as the main contrast color here, and I feel like this motif is now working really well. The other motif that I really like is this one at the top. There's some subtle contrast between these, these little V motifs and the background color here, but it's just enough. It's not super loud, but there's enough contrast there that you can see what's going on. The other thing I really liked is now this 1x1 corrugated rib, which is a lot more subtle in terms of the overall picture of the garment. It's nice and ties all the colors in, but it doesn't stand out too much. The motifs that I still wanted to tweak a little bit from this point are these two. The changes that I wanted to make in both of these two motifs had to do with creating just a little bit more definition. So all of these yarns that are being used in this section, for example, are heathered yarns. They are dyed in the wool and then mixed in the card. And so the yarns come out with this beautiful heathered texture, but heathered yarns will often just not give you the definition that you want in some instances. Sometimes you do want a little bit of a soft look, but here around the outside of these little flower motifs, I wanted more definition. So I wanted to change the background color out here. And now here, similarly with this green motif, all of these colors have sort of the same level of saturation, and so this is getting just a bit washed out. Since I was just changing out these two motifs, I just decided to do a little piece of a swatch so I could just sort of place it over and see if I was then getting the definition that I wanted, and I am. So let's look at these changes. I kept everything the same in this section except for changing out the background color to one that is actually still a little bit heathered, but it's much more solid than the original pink that I had chosen. And then down here I kept the contrast colors the same, but I changed out that green to a charcoal gray. And that doesn't really change the overall look all that much, but it just gives a little bit more definition that I think is beneficial to the overall design. This concept of using a heathered versus a solid yarn can really take you a long way. If we look back at my yell vest from the previous video where this teal is really dominating here, one of the things that's making this teal stand out so much is that this is a dyed solid color. It's not heathered at all. And so those dyed solid colors are going to stand out more in a design far more than a heathered yarn would. And so in this case, if I had maybe used a more heathered yarn like in this center panel here, that might have been a little bit less overwhelming in terms of the amount of teal in this design. So sometimes some colors will dominate when you don't expect it, and that is just another good reason to swatch. So doing these types of swatches is why I save those teeny tiny balls of yarn. If you remember back to my first video in this series where I showed my Colorwork stash and I show those little tiny balls of yarn that I keep, I will keep those and I'll throw them in a swatch like this. You know, if I have enough to use for a little contrast color in the middle of a motif or something like that in a swatch, even if I don't have enough to actually go on to complete the garment, at that point, then I can take my swatch and go over to my color cards that I also showed and match up and see if I can find something from any one of those companies that I have those color cards from that I can order that will be close enough to then allow me to complete the rest of the garment. Like this lime green that I showed is some random yarn that I got in a swap. I have zero idea what it is, but if I am using this as a color in one of my motifs and I don't think I have enough for the project, here is a good option from one of my color cards that might work out. So I have started working on this garment already, and this is a sneak peek. I have not shown this on my regular episodes yet, but here is how the sweater is going. I am so jazzed about it. I mean, it's a lot of look, right? Marie Wallin patterns are just a cacophony of patterns and color, but I am very happy with how this is coming out, and I'm really excited to show you more in the near future. So if you would like to see more of this project as it goes along, please do subscribe and ring the bell so that you'll be notified when my next episode goes up. Thank you so much for being here with me for this little video series. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, let me know what you think of it, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.